Hey, I'm called Laban.
The middle-aged man spoke. Enkrid did not bother to gather his thoughts. Since when did he ever move by thinking? Following his heart's desires and chasing dreams had led him to where he was now. Enkrid swung his sword. From below, the blade shot up, reflecting the light of the torches. A dull sound echoed heavily. Yes, dull, it wasn't sharp, though once called tutor. Now the blade of this sharp and unyielding sword merely cut through the man's arm. It wasn't fast, it was dull and slow. Laban could feel and had to watch as his arm was severed. Even though he could see it coming, he couldn't avoid it. All he could do was watch as one of his limbs disappeared, feeling a burning heat instead of the loss.
Arr.
A terrible scream echoed throughout the wide cave. What had been attached below the shoulder fell to the ground. The arm, now independent of the human body, twitched and moved. It emphasized its claim by spraying blood everywhere. The one who lost the arm screamed as if to oppose the claim.
Ah.
The movement, accompanied by the screams, scattered red blood all around. Much of it splattered onto the armor and face of Enkrid, who stood in front, but he did not flinch and simply watched indifferently. Blood that had splattered on his cheek trickled down and fell to the ground. As Enkrid watched Laban, who was going mad from the pain of losing his arm, he casually spoke.
"Can you stop the bleeding, Esther?"
It's not difficult.
The method of stopping the bleeding was a bit extreme. Esther reached out, and flames erupted from her hand, cauterizing the wound.
Arg, stop. Please stop.
Enkrid wondered how many times this mad, middle-aged bastard had heard such desperate screams like his own, then decided not to think about it.
Why? I only did as I was told. I sold out for just a few gold coins.
Already having lost a significant amount of blood before the cauterization, his voice was now hoarse from screaming in pain. Enkrid raised his sword.
"The leg."
With an emotionless word, he cut off the leg. With a thud, the severed leg flew to the side. The leg, now independent from the human body, also ruthlessly emphasized its claim. Under the countless torches illuminating the area, bright red blood once again dyed the surroundings. Then, Esther cauterized the wound again with magical flames, and another feeble, pained scream echoed out.
Arr.
Having only lost his limbs and been cauterized, Laban now shed tears of blood. His teeth broke, mixing blood with saliva as it spilled out of his mouth. He continuously let out a chilling scream.
"It seems he's in pain."
When burned with fire, it always turns out like this.
Enkrid spoke, and Jackson replied, it wasn't just a simple brand. They were cutting off his limbs and burning the severed parts. Jackson might not be a master of torture, but he knew how to do it. He understood the human body and knew where the pain would be most effective. Jackson was also well versed in the more refined methods of torture, like pulling out nails and driving needles underneath. For someone like Jackson, it was surprising that the alchemist was still alive. Their conversation was indifferent, as if they were talking about a worthless object, like a stone lying on the road. And then, unable to endure the pain, Laban, or whatever his name was, finally rolled his eyes back. It looked like he would die soon. Enkrid approached and poked his forehead with the sword. No matter how much pain one is in, the senses are always sensitive to new pain, especially when the sword, after poking, was slowly dragged down to maximize the pain.
Says stop.
Laban spoke in a hoarse voice. Enkrid asked,
"Is there a way to bring back the person trapped inside?"
Jackson thought it was an astonishingly timed question. If a person doesn't open their mouth at that moment, they aren't human. Even a specially trained assassin would choose to end their own life before getting to this point, rather than trying to endure it. Laban blinked countless times, trembling but still rolled his eyes. The fact that his mind was still functioning showed that his true value lay in his head. Then came his answer.
It is possible.
Though his pronunciation was heavily slurred, it wasn't difficult to understand. As soon as Enkrid heard those words, he split the alchemist's head in two. He swung his sword vertically, mercilessly cleaving the head. With a sickening sound, the skull cracked open, and the brain, which would have been invaluable if he were alive, spilled out.
Why?
Why ask and then kill? Jackson asked the question without realizing it.
"What's the point in asking something you already know?"
Hearing Enkrid's answer, Jackson nodded. He understood too. The alchemist, Laban, was just spouting nonsense. There was no way to restore someone who had been so utterly broken. No such method existed. Even the greatest cleric on the continent couldn't do what couldn't be done. The so-called saints could reattach a freshly severed arm, but they couldn't heal a shattered mind. That was beyond the realm of the divinity. What could be done for a drugged woman who was gnawing on her own arm, or a boy who was already dead? And what about something that was neither a ghoul nor a human? If someone could undo such things, that person would rightly be called a god.
It would have been valuable to take him alive.
Sinar asked, posing a reasonable question, and a reasonable answer came back.
I didn't like the look of him.
I see, that's understandable.
Sinar nodded in agreement, and Esther also nodded solemnly.
He was a wretched one.
Those who walk the path of magic, mystery, and spells also tread the path of the inhuman, but at the same time they confront the real world. They do not forget their own bodies and flesh, or the fact that they are human. A true wizard remembers this, whether dealing with fairies, dwarves, or dragons, because they have physical bodies. A wizard must not forget this either. But that alchemist had strayed from this path. It was evident in the things he had done, seen everywhere, and in the contents of his research notes. They were truly putrid and vile. Thus he was a wretched one. That's what she meant, although his appearance was also wretched. Esther noticed that Enkrid seemed unaffected, as if he hadn't lost anything like anger or resentment. So where did the motivation to move the sword come from? Esther wondered, but she didn't ask. She would observe, analyze, and figure it out. It's a better way to learn than asking directly. In truth, there was no complicated reason. Enkrid cut him down as if discarding something filthy. It was like washing off dirt from his hands. Punish the one who wielded the sword rather than the sword itself. What kind of nonsense is that? This wasn't the work of a sword. It was the work of a man who could take charge of his own life. He had both the ability and the will. He just did what he wanted to do. Not only the one who ordered it, but also the one who carried it out bears responsibility. From Enkrid's perspective, those who committed such acts had no right to live. What if the other party was the ruler of a nation? What then? It wouldn't matter. Even if he had to spend his life being chased, living as a fugitive, and treated like a golden pouch by bounty hunters, Enkrid would still do it. That was how he pursued his dreams, how he walked his path. If anyone had known his true intentions, at the very least, Finn would have shaken her head, because it was nothing short of madness.
There's no shortage of scum like that on this continent.
She might have shouted this, and that's why. Enkrid wanted to cut down such people whenever he encountered them. That's why he took up the sword. Because being a knight isn't just about fighting well. Of course, Finn couldn't read Enkrid's thoughts.
He died well enough. There was some foolish alchemist here and now he's dead. What more can be done?
She spoke as if it was a matter of course. It was her way of saying there was no need to take responsibility. Enkrid didn't have much to say, and Jackson silently respected his commander's choice. In any case, he had already gained everything he needed. And to be honest,
I might have killed him myself.
he didn't want to keep him alive. It wasn't a calculated decision. It was a feeling, an emotion. For the first time in a long while, it was an emotional response.
This isn't the place to use it.
He couldn't let his worn-out and withered emotions spill out here. His emotions were like a prepared blade, and those who would receive it were already determined.
Company commander's troops have entered from outside. Let's bring them in to clean up, and it might be better to leave some of those still alive locked up as they are.
Those who were drugged would undoubtedly cause chaos if they were let out.
Let's do that.
Sinar said, looking over a few sheets of paper in her hand. After reading the common language written on the thin paper, she spoke.
There are a few more villages like this one. It seems like it's going to be a long outing. What do you think?
Though her question was concise, Enkrid understood it clearly. Jackson would follow his orders, and Finn would follow Sinar's.
One of the villages was even raising beasts.
Enkrid could tell from Sinar's words that they had not been idle. They simply had too many opponents to meticulously investigate each one. Enkrid's mind naturally grasped the current situation.
If we don't strike with an elite force, all the experiments and research materials will be lost and destroyed. In that case, there will be nothing to gain after the battle, and it will give those who need to be killed a chance to escape.
They were facing an opponent that needed to be confronted with a full company. Even in this village, there had been a witch capable of striking with lightning. So, they needed to prepare for that as well. The Black Blade Bandits were not a group to be taken lightly. Enkrid had slightly misunderstood the situation. The Black Blade Bandits had prepared various types of hideouts. Some were places where they sold slaves. Others were where they tamed beasts with drugs. This place was the most important, which is why there was a valuable wizard here. Even for the Black Blade Bandits, wizards were not common, his thoughts concluded. There was nothing more to ponder.
Let's go.
Enkrid responded. If there were more of these places, they needed to be dealt with. A small elite group had gathered, those skilled in moving stealthily. There was a wizard among them. Even if Esther didn't take the lead again, she would speak up if she sensed anything. In many ways, it was a good opportunity. Above all, if they didn't eliminate everything now, the enemies would just go into hiding again.
Aren't you curious about who the leader of the Black Blade Bandits is?
Sinner asked, without adding any commentary.
Do you know?
I've learned that it's one of the kingdom's nobles.
Jackson was also listening to this conversation. There was a deliberate intent. The information they had leaked to certain parts of the kingdom was finally showing results. Jackson, too, was very eager to see the leader of the Black Blade Bandits. If he had a wife separated by war, he would want to see this person even more than her. After entrusting the village cleanup to the allied troops that had entered, the group moved on.
This is horrendous.
The platoon leader who had entered shook his head after seeing the horrors inside the cave. A few inexperienced soldiers couldn't hold back their nausea and vomited. The foul smell of vomit spread throughout the cave. This was one of the reasons why Enkrid had taken up the sword, to not let such things live, and so the group set off into the mountains. Taking the rough path often leads to a shortcut. Finn was an excellent guide in this regard. In one of the Black Blade's villages, 4 village chiefs operated as one. They were 4 men who had grown up together since childhood, and everyone called them the Bolan brothers. They had bald heads and fierce looks, typical of bandits. They were skilled enough to raid from various places while managing the village. After all, the Black Blade Bandits were essentially a group that also engaged in banditry. In front of the 4 stood a man with black hair. It was broad daylight.
How did you get in here?
The eldest asked, rubbing his shaved head with his hand. It was a cloudy day, but no snow was falling. The second brother narrowed his eyes. The village was oddly quiet. There were dozens of members here. How had this guy made it in without any noise? The man silently adjusted his sword belt, placed his hand on the grip of his sword, and asked,
If you feel you've been wronged, now's the time to say so. I'm a bit busy.
Busy? The third brother's large eyes rolled around. The fourth brother was quick-witted. He already sensed danger and quietly slipped back, grabbing the end of a hidden net. He was ready to throw it if things went south. The net, with weights attached to its corners, was the fourth brother's prized weapon. In fact, the brothers had gained many advantages in fights using nets. The third brother was a master at throwing darts. He, too, was ready, his hand caressing the poisoned dart tips. The second and eldest brothers were masters of hand-to-hand combat. No more words were exchanged. Enkrid and the 4 brothers locked eyes in a tense standoff. The tension between the 5 of them filled the air. The spacious hall, which the bald brothers usually treated like a palace, now felt cramped.
What the hell is this guy?
After a brief moment of thought, the 4th brother threw the net. Enkrid, standing calmly, saw the falling net and the 2 bald brothers as mere points. He mentally connected those points with a line, moved his feet, and swung his sword along the line drawn by his body and hand. As the sword moved, it struck the weights at the ends of the net, causing it to tangle in mid-air, and left long marks on the necks of the 3rd and 4th brothers who had thrown it. Of course, since these marks were made by a sword, blood gushed out from them. Seeing the blood pouring out in torrents, the 2nd brother's eyes turned wild.
You son of a bitch!
The fight wasn't particularly fierce. In other words, it ended in an instant. As the thick blade of the approaching enemy swung down, Enkrid deflected it with a fluid sword technique. Defense and attack happened simultaneously. As he deflected the blow, the tip of his sword struck the end of the enemy's forehead. The blade pierced into the forehead.
You bastard!
The eldest brother's axe came flying at him. It was a thick and heavy weapon, wielded by a man who prided himself on his great strength. The eldest brother put all his might into the strike. Enkrid, having punctured a hole in the 2nd brother's forehead, pivoted on his left foot, and countered the attack. A thunderous sound erupted, and then,
Who are you?
the eldest brother, unable to withstand the force and with both arms broken, spoke in a defeated tone. Enkrid took a deep breath, releasing the heart of great strength, and replied,
What's it to you?
"You're about to die anyway." Enkrid's sword showed no mercy or forgiveness, and that was the end of it. There was no wizard, and Jackson, having found some kind of artifact from who knows where, went on a rampage. Jackson silently killed the 5 bandits guarding the village center, allowing Enkrid to enter. However, even after thoroughly searching the village, nothing hidden was found. What is this place? Just a gathering point for troops? As Enkrid showed signs of doubt, Finn stepped forward.
He hid something in the forest. I followed the traces and they led that way.
Finn had a knack for tracking people. It's inevitable for traces to be left behind on paths humans traverse. The scent is different, footprints are left behind. Even a single broken branch on a body gives it away. Finn had found such traces, and Enkrid, having wandered the continent and encountered various people, suspected he might have once been a bounty hunter. Naturally, the past didn't matter. He just thought it was helpful. That's how they found the hidden cave from the village. It was a village built alongside a small forest, a bit off to the north. In the distance, they could see the Penhanil River, and these people had dug a cave inside the forest to hide the beasts. Every one of them was drugged up and staggering. There was a wolf beast with its tongue hanging out, drooling, and signs of the alchemist, who had previously cut off arms, legs, and split heads. That bastard had really meddled with a lot of things. It was a wolf beast, but its legs were like those of a deer. When this kind of synthesis succeeds, the world calls such a creature a chimera. It's a monster created by humans, neither a beast nor a creature.
Who's there?
There were 5 of them, either beast tamers or people meant to be the beast's emergency rations.
If you attack, you'll die.
The moment they heard that, they attacked, and then they died. One guy who had been rolling his eyes from behind saw this and released the remaining beasts. Kak! A lion with a snake's tail charged. A half-finished chimera, similar to a manticore, came rushing, but lost its balance and tumbled to the ground. Enkrid split the head of the unfinished chimera lion. With a swoosh, the blade splitting the head in half, and brain matter along with dark red blood spilled out. Jackson and Sinar also joined in the fight. Esther climbed up a nearby tree and just watched. The guy who released the beasts tried to escape at the right moment, but a foot-long arrow lodged in his head, killing him. It was Finn's work.
Where do you think you're going?
It meant there was no escape. The weapon that fired the arrow was something Enkrid had taken from the Black Blade bandits.
She uses it way better than that bandit.
She hid the launcher in her sleeve, and when the target's attention shifted, she aimed at the back of the head and fired. Unless someone was extremely sharp, they wouldn't be able to avoid having an arrow-shaped decoration stuck in their skull. The beasts that emerged were ferociously violent. Grower! A human-faced dog with a snake's venom gland sprayed venom into the sand. However, they were all half-baked. There was no reason to spend too much time killing them all. It took over half a day just to kill them all, clear the village, and clean up.
The next one is a 4-day walk from here.
Enkrid nodded at the words of the ferry company commander. Afterward, it was just like a traveling circus performance. Find the village, enter it, hit them, beat them, kill them, and clean up. It was a continuous cycle of such tasks. Most of the village bandits ran away when they saw that the village chief and beasts had all been killed. That made things easier.
If the higher-ups knew about this, would they leave us alone? Anyone seeing this might think we're starting a rebellion. If you value your life, follow me.
The bandit who still had his wits about him made this judgment, and while he fled, he gathered a force as he went. In any organization, there are always those who harbor ambitions. Enkrid didn't bother to chase them down one by one. He didn't have the time to waste on that.
This feels unsettling. It's bothersome.
The sharp-witted bandit said these words as he fled. What remained was very little. The village that Enkrid struck quickly became desolate. The village, where they used to exchange information among themselves, had tried to prepare, but it was meaningless. When 5 of those guarding the village were killed with a single silent slice to their carotid arteries, the bandits were gripped with fear. Damn it. Did a ghost just pop out or something? The bandit, who was responsible for the village and was once a top-class assassin, was consumed by fear. An impossible event had occurred. The 6 bodyguards who had been protecting him vanished without a sound, yet he didn't even sense their presence. No, he did see it with his own eyes. It was in the corner of the bedroom. A hand emerged from the darkness, grasping and twisting the necks of his guards. It was as if the hand had snapped thousands of necks before. The most terrifying part was that there was no sound as the necks twisted. What was even scarier was that the dying guards didn't even seem to realize they were being killed. Their expressions showed no shock, and they continued to scan their surroundings with sharp eyes, their mouths tightly shut in tension as their necks were snapped and they died. There. The village chief, who was formerly an assassin, swiftly threw a poison-coated dart. The extremely toxic dart, which could kill with just a scratch, vanished into the darkness. Several guards stabbed their spears into the spot where their comrade had disappeared. When they stirred it around, they were met with a horrifying sight. A hole had appeared in the ground behind their comrade's body, but when it had been made was unknown. When? That was the chief's final moment and his last words. A thin line descended from above and sliced through his neck with a swift shwick. It was an assassination tool created through alchemy, the string knife. A blade thinner and sharper than a pinky finger sliced through the chief's neck, leaving it hanging in the air. Dealing with the remaining guards was no problem at all. The panicked ones even started stabbing each other. Jackson, who was hanging upside down from the ceiling, threw 2 silent knives and finished the job. Given the chaos that had erupted, there was nothing the villagers could do but flee. The dwelling where one group had stayed became as deserted as if it were haunted by ghosts. A gust of wind whistled through the center of the village.
If a wraith popped out from somewhere, it'd make the perfect scene,
Finn said. Enkrid agreed, but that didn't mean he was going to let his guard down. Of course, they didn't plan to leave things like this forever. After eliminating the village's combat-capable population, slitting the chief's throat, and causing a commotion, Sinar sent out a raven. Caw! As she extended her arm toward the trees, a jet-black bird flew over and perched on her arm. The trained raven immediately flew to the border guard to deliver the news. This meant that the military force was moving to take over the village that the bandits had abandoned and fled. In the meantime, Enkrid and his group continued moving. They headed toward the next village. If necessary, they bought horses and rode them. If not, they released them and crossed cliffs. The path required them to cling halfway up the cliff, but such a rugged mountain path was not particularly difficult. Rustle. Stone dust scattered and fell underfoot. The entire group was clinging to a cliff so high that if anyone were to fall, even the luckiest among them would never walk again, yet none of them felt any sense of danger. Finn wedged a dagger into the crevice of the cliff, then used her elbow guard to hammer it in deeper before grabbing hold and climbing up. As she skillfully ascended, she looked down and said,
if someone were to fall and die here, that would be pretty funny in its own way.
It was the kind of comment that was bound to come up, and it wasn't just about people. How about the panther following them? Its claws, as if they were some legendary blade, dug into the cliff as easily as one might stir mud, climbing up as if it were walking on flat ground. It wasn't surprising. Those claws and its skill were enough to scale even a sheer vertical wall. As for the others, Enkrid, Jackson, and Sinar, there was no need to even mention them. They were all perfectly capable of handling themselves. Enkrid climbed steadily, 1 step at a time, while Jackson appeared as if his hands were coated in glue. Sinar moved with ease, even joking as she skillfully scaled the cliff. She called out,
Ever kissed anyone on a cliff, fiancé?
What do you think?
Sometimes I wonder if my fiancé is even a virgin.
It didn't seem to matter whether they were on a cliff so high that even the luckiest person would have only their legs shattered if they fell, or in a parlor sipping tea. They exchanged jokes, as if it were all the same. It was impressive that Enkrid could respond to her banter so calmly. In any case, if any of them were to die here, it would be about as likely as a raven dying from an ant bite. As they continued on, they reached the next village. In a place crowded with slaves, Sinar found 3 of her kin. She didn't even furrow her brow.
Got caught like fools.
She criticized them sharply, and the 3 said nothing in response. One of the male fairies, as soon as he was freed, picked up a dagger that had fallen to the ground and charged at a bandit with a smooth, clean-shaven face, repeatedly stabbing him in the gut.
Save me, Urk.
The bandit, who had been pitifully begging for his life, was caught off guard and received 6 holes in his belly as a reward. There was a trace of something like hatred in the fairy's eyes.
A peach even insects wouldn't eat.
Enkrid, who overheard the male fairy muttering, pondered the meaning of his words. Thanks to the fairy company commander, he had become familiar with fairy expressions. It wasn't in the fairy language, but in the Empire's common tongue, so he could understand the meaning. When you grow peaches, most of them will have worms. If a peach doesn't have any worms, then what does that mean? It was a phrase used to describe someone who was utterly worthless, a piece of trash. It wasn't hard to understand where his hatred came from. The 2 female fairies had likely been through something similar. Their bodies had been violated. And in the midst of that, the male fairy had also suffered.
Someone who doesn't discriminate between men and women, huh?
He had broad tastes. It wasn't a pleasant thing to witness, but on a continent-wide scale, how many times does something like this happen? So, is it possible to cut down and kill every single one of them with a sword? When he was younger, he thought that if he became a knight, it might be possible. After leaving the village, he realized it wasn't possible. The issue wasn't a matter of talent. It wasn't just that he had been defeated by a boy barely in his teens that was the issue. Enkrid was young and short-sighted. His concept of a village expanded to a city, and the idea of a city grew to encompass the continent. That's when he realized, even if you became a knight, even if you became a scourge on the battlefield who could cut down 1,000 men with a single sword, you couldn't cut down things like this. So, do you just give up and let it go? Should he remain as nothing more than a flashy swordsman on the surface? When he dreamed of becoming a knight, was his ideal merely to don radiant armor and emit a halo of light? Was that really all there was to it? It couldn't be. Enkrid had never thought that way. The knight he envisioned was not just a killing tool that wielded a sword skillfully. As these thoughts filled his mind,
Do you want to wipe them all out? Burn everything down? You can. If necessary, I'll help you.
Jackson approached and spoke. His eyes burned red. It didn't seem like something he had carefully thought out. It just seemed like words spoken in the heat of the moment. And that made Enkrid wonder,
Is he a little unwell?
Jackson had a habit of saying strange things from time to time. Enkrid gathered his thoughts and asked,
Why all of a sudden?
Your eyes were burning.
At Jackson's words, Enkrid briefly closed his eyes and then opened them. The flames from earlier were gone from his eyes. At least, the destructive fire that Jackson had seen had disappeared.
Let's go.
Enkrid focused on the task at hand. Now that he could wield a sword as well as any junior knight, was he having different thoughts? That wasn't it. The embers in Enkrid's heart had always been burning. It was just that they were now becoming visible.
Well, look at that. There's a dwarf too?
It was as if they were playing some kind of game to collect different races. It was a village where they had dug tunnels all over to hide slaves.
Damn it. Who are these bastards?
A few bandits resisted, but their throats split open beneath their vocal cords, spewing blood as they died. It was Jackson's handiwork. He moved silently, concealing his presence while using the items he had picked up.
I received a useful artifact as a...
The way he boldly said this while looting the belongings of the dead made it clear that he wasn't quite normal either. None of the bandits that Jackson sneaked up on even managed to react. He went around, cutting their throats one by one with his dagger. When 8 noisy bandits had been killed, the rest knelt down, trembling with fear. The one who acted as the village chief was already dead. This time, the chief wasn't a wizard or an assassin. He wasn't even skilled with a sword. He just kept trying to pull off tricks by exploiting openings, setting up traps all over his bedroom. But with Sinar and Jackson in front of him,
That says it all.
there was no need for Enkrid to step in this time either. Well, except for the one time he swung his sword. When 2 of the village's so-called tough guys attacked, he parried with the fluid sword technique and struck with the snake sword. Thud, thud! With 2 fleshy sounds, 2 corpses were made, and no one else dared to challenge Enkrid. After suppressing the village with such brutal methods, they freed all the remaining slaves, and as for those who continued to resist, they were all cut down. Most of the villages were similar. A few of the so-called strong ones would attack, and after cutting them down, the rest would either surrender or flee. In this way, it took 2 months of searching for and fighting in the villages hidden here and there by the Black Blade bandits. You could say it was just 2 months. Considering the actions they had taken, it was appropriate to say so. It wasn't until half of the villages under the control of the Black Blade's officer had been destroyed that he realized what was happening. They had moved that quickly. By the time he figured it out, the remaining half of the villages were beyond saving.
These crazy bastards.
The officer slammed a candlestick onto the desk in a fit of rage. The blow left a dent in the center of the rosewood desk, splintering the wood and sending shards flying.
Huff, huff.
Even after this, the Black Blade officer's anger didn't subside. In fact, his fury only grew stronger. In the end, he threw the silver candlestick out the window. The expensive stained glass, colored red, yellow, and blue, shattered and rained down in pieces. The silver candlestick fell into the garden below the 3-story mansion. The gardener, who had been trimming the bushes with shears, was startled and ducked his head. He quickly picked up the fallen silver candlestick and went to find the butler. It seemed that something was wrong. Of course, they had no idea what was really happening. The officer had hidden his true identity well. Most of the mansion's staff knew him only as a nobleman and official of the royal court. Despite his boiling anger, the bandit officer could do nothing. A new guild had emerged in the capital, and they were unifying the underworld with terrifying speed.
What the hell is this language revival guild?
The guild's stated purpose was absurd. Among the groups they were crushing in the underworld were several criminal guilds that the officer had been backing. Because of this, he couldn't back out.
Damn it.
There was nothing he could do about the people targeting his hideouts. In reality, even if he stepped in, nothing would change. It was inevitable. He had no more forces to send, no more swordsmen to deploy. The enemy was better prepared. These were people who had deliberately set out to destroy villages, so he had no choice but to send a report to the main base. The thought that he might die filled his mind.
Damn it, damn it.
His enterprises were in ruins, and the villages he had spent his life building were gone. The officer wanted to scream, but his attendant stopped him.
Are you going to throw away your value like this? Find out the name of the person behind this. That's your best option.
It was sound advice. The officer put in the effort. He scattered gold coins among the information guilds and hired several mercenaries, and that's how he got the name.
Marcus, you son of a bitch.
Cowardly bastard, filthy bastard, damn you, you son of a bitch.
The Black Blade bandits officer cursed Marcus, spitting blood. Of course, there was a bit of misunderstanding. This whole affair was started by Sinar, and Enkrid joined in and swiftly dealt with it. However, the more they investigated, the more it seemed the Border Guard Reserve Unit was involved. So, who could have orchestrated this? Who was the mastermind behind it? A name kept coming up that was constantly irritating them. Marcus, a noble with connections in the royal palace, and rumored to be eyeing the position of Grand Duke of the North.
A bitch who should be chewed up and spit out.
Whether he repeated it inwardly or shouted it out loud, the anger wouldn't subside. He was so enraged that he felt like lying on the ground, screaming and thrashing about. That's how furious he was. It was only after considerable effort that he managed to calm down, just a bit. The officer gritted his teeth, but it wasn't as if he could just go and kill him right away. Whenever they sent assassins to the border guard, they never returned. Even when they tried to kill Enkrid, they never succeeded once. Did they even leave a scratch? They had sent men armed with poison, but why had they all been defeated? Was it because their opponent was skilled? The Black Blade bandits considered that as well. The officer thought so too. At least he assumed Enkrid was at the level of a junior knight. Enkrid's feats were both exaggerated and underestimated in parts. However, none of them easily believed that Enkrid had truly reached the level of a junior knight. It was unbelievable that someone could suddenly grasp the concept of will while swinging a sword on bare ground. Sometimes such geniuses do appear, but if he had that much talent, why would he only now come into the spotlight? Maybe if he had been hiding somewhere, but that wasn't the case either. His traces were everywhere. He was a mercenary who handed over to shabby instructors to learn the sword. He had been a hunter at times for a few pennies, and also did odd jobs. If there was no work with the sword, he would even move to help with wall repairs. He was that kind of person, so how could they believe he had become a junior knight? The Black Blade Bandits were rational. It was the only conclusion they could reach. Moreover, Count Molson had manipulated the information to some extent. Thus, they could not accurately gauge Enkrid's level. That didn't mean they were underestimating him. It was clear there had been some change, even if it came late. However, they didn't truly believe he had reached the level of a junior knight. There was undoubtedly a supporter behind him. Who could be the most significant name among those supporters? It had to be Marcus, that devious bastard.
Now it's war.
The officer shouted alone in the study, where no one else was present. Of course, it wasn't just his thought alone. His superiors, the leaders of the Black Blade Bandits, had issued similar orders. Gather your forces. Seek the help of the cult as well. Burn down the border guard. They were not lords, nor did they have territories, but this abnormal bandit group, with its power and influence, decided to exert its strength. They used the black gold coins they had amassed and called in their connections. Members who had been active within the bandit group gathered. Some mercenaries, who would even kill their own parents for krona, joined in. Thus, a force began to gather on a small hill west of the border guard. It was a force of over 500. Could they breach the border guard's walls with this force? It wasn't an easy task, but the specialty of the Black Blade Bandits wasn't war. It was intrigue, and so they did. The uprising of the bandit group, ostensibly a territorial war caused by Marcus expanding and seizing neighboring lands, had a significant impact. It marked the beginning of a civil war and served as a pretext for many to start moving. For Marcus, who was within the border guard, this was completely unexpected. Just before the uprising of the territorial war, he said,
"How many villages are there? Send troops to take them all. From now on, we are not just the border guard reserve unit, but the border guard of this territory. Who will be the lord? The first lord will be me."
Marcus confidently pointed his thumb at himself in response to the company commander's question. Soon after, Tarnin, the viscount of the neighboring territory and the original owner of the villages, declared a territorial war.
"How dare you act without the permission of the royal family? Your greed knows no bounds, and you have no shame. Marcus, you must beg for forgiveness at once. If you do not repent, I shall cut off your head and offer it to the gods."
The words spoken after gathering the troops were nothing short of ridiculous. Since they didn't bother to hide it, the news quickly reached Marcus's ears.
"That pig bastard must have taken the wrong drugs,"
Marcus remarked, his voice calm as he leaned on his office desk, resting his chin on his hand. His intention was clear. It was the beginning of a civil war. Of course, that didn't mean fighting would start immediately. As with most territorial wars, Viscount Tarnin sent a messenger first. These wars typically began with arguments, leading reluctantly to battle.
"But what is that bastard trying to pull?"
This time, however, the situation was a bit different. Viscount Tarnin had gathered mercenaries and some skilled fighters from somewhere to provoke and challenge Marcus. It seemed as if he was ready to fight immediately. But instead of attacking, he just dug in and held his ground. Why? Who benefits from holding out like this? Who stands to lose? Marcus wasn't a fool. He knew that letting Tarnin and his supporters waste their resources was more advantageous than attacking right away. Marcus tried to unravel and probe the intentions of his opponent. He analyzed the situation. What was Tarnin's specialty? Eating. What was the fool Tarnin's strength? His skin is so thick that blades barely penetrate. What power did Viscount Tarnin's territory possess? Absolutely nothing. What was that bastard relying on? The Black Blade Bandits. Marcus evaluated the situation and the order of events. But why was Tarnin behaving like this? Gathering troops obviously costs money. You have to take care of their food and lodging. And there were mercenaries. You had to pay them their wages too. If you don't pay them while avoiding combat, some of the mercenaries might just turn around and put star-shaped holes in Tarnin's belly.
But why?
Even after assembling his forces, Tarnin didn't seem eager to fight. He only made excuses about training and other nonsense. Marcus decided to wait. There was nothing he could do immediately. It was true that he had encroached on Tarnin's territory. His plan had been to quietly take a few villages, establish something resembling a domain, and then seek permission from the royal court.
It seems like someone is backing that pig Tarnin.
But who could it be? The maneuver orchestrated by the shadowy figure behind Tarnin was a heavy blow. It hit Marcus like a strike to the back of the head. Due to the growing chaos in the north caused by the territorial war, Marcus, a loyal friend of the royal court and a pillar of the Centerpole family, is hereby commanded. That was how the letter began. Marcus was a gambler. He knew how to seize the moment, but the content of the letter bound his hands and feet before he could even start. It was a scheme to keep him from participating in the decisive moment, leaving no way out. All Marcus could do was let out a hollow laugh. He had been utterly outmaneuvered.
Did you all have fun without me, huh?
As soon as he returned, Rem greeted him. Enkrid thought to himself that this guy never changes.
I was on a mission.
Oh, I had a blast. While you were out having fun, I was stuck here, huh? Teaching some beast folk that someone just left behind, huh?
What a long-winded way to say he wanted a sparring match. From the side, Dunbachel could be seen standing with her eyes swollen and bruised. It seemed like she had been through a lot. It made Enkrid feel a bit sorry for her. If he ignored it, Rem would probably just keep beating Dunbachel up today as well. Besides, Enkrid was only feeling a little fatigued, with no injuries to speak of.
Come on, you big-mouthed barbarian.
Enkrid joked. Rem grinned widely.
So let's settle this grudge.
With that nonsense, the sparring began.
You haven't changed a bit,
Rem said, swinging his axes in a cross pattern. He then suddenly displayed an intimidating aura. He claimed to have learned it from watching the rapier swordsman, but just hearing that was absurd. Could someone really imitate that just by watching? Of course, the way he implemented it was completely different. Not that he would know. Enkrid refused to be intimidated, and then they spoke with their swords. Steel met steel, and golden sparks flew between them. Teresa, uncharacteristically quiet, sat with her legs together, patiently waiting her turn. This was just another day. The next sparring match would be Teresa's turn. She had been refining a few techniques, practicing and honing them with Auden. She was curious if they would work against Enkrid. Her heart was pounding. While he was gone, nothing had felt enjoyable. Even though she had been sharpening her skills and building her body, a sense of emptiness crept in. It was like becoming a landlord with an empty granary.
Why do you seem so down?
Noticing her somewhat listless demeanor, Auden asked. Teresa took a moment to reflect on her own feelings and then asked,
What if the commander doesn't come back? What will happen then?
Auden chuckled.
He will return.
Auden, who always spoke of everything in the name of the gods and showed deep contemplation rather than certainty, was strangely confident when it came to Enkrid. There was no doubt. The moment Teresa saw Enkrid return, her heart raced like never before. Her face flushed. Why wouldn't it?
The techniques.
She finally had someone to test them on, someone who would meet her fighting spirit, the one who had pulled her out of the cult, the only one who would match her sword and shield. Others could spar with her, but it wasn't the same. Enkrid was different. Teresa didn't try to understand what it was that made him so. What mattered to her was the process of fighting him, the process of sparring with him. It was about raising her sword and shield in front of him. For this, she could set her life ablaze, and with that fire she would slash and kill any enemy that stood before Enkrid. She would make sure no enemy stood before him, so he wouldn't just keep looking forward. She would make him turn around and face her. With this sudden realization, Teresa knelt on one knee and began to pray. She steeled herself and engraved this purpose in her mind. It wasn't in the way of the cult, nor did she invoke the name of any god, but it was certainly a prayer.
Are you asleep? Aren't you coming next?
The commander, who had been knocked down by Rem, quickly got back up and spoke. Teresa, who had been kneeling, stood up. With her shield raised to cover herself, Teresa smiled.
Wanderer Teresa is stepping in now.
You could call it a pleasant sparring session, at least. That's how Enkrid felt. Rem enjoyed it. Teresa was eager to challenge him, and even Dunbachel, who insisted on fighting with two swords, was a pretty interesting opponent.
Still sloppy.
I know.
Dunbachel was aware, yet she insisted on using two swords. Watching her, Enkrid couldn't help but wonder why she was so adamant.
She's a crazy one. Crazy as they come. If you run into a high priest while wandering around, kidnap them and bring them here. Everyone here needs healing.
Rem said, Apparently, Dunbachel had been so impressed by Rem that she decided to use dual weapons. Enkrid let it be. It wasn't his place to interfere, and so Enkrid returned to his routine.
But why haven't you improved at all?
Rem asked, a hint of dissatisfaction in his tone. Had Enkrid's skills stayed the same? That was possible. So had nothing changed? Not exactly. Enkrid had spent 2 months traveling and had plenty of time to think, climbing cliffs, riding horses, walking, running, and entering villages. The battles were brief, and the marches were long. Along the way, Sinar cracked jokes in the way of fairies, Finn shared trivial stories, and Jackson occasionally said strange things like,
"Do whatever you desire, holding it in will only make you sick."
But I've never held anything back.
Enkrid thought sincerely, but others might have seen it differently. Despite his abilities, Enkrid didn't dwell on worldly rewards. So, what was it that he truly desired? Jackson's question touched on that very point. Enkrid knew what he wanted, and he was walking the right path, following the markers. During those 2 months of walking and more walking, his mind seemed to work sharper than ever. Enkrid reflected on his training methods, what he had, what he needed to cultivate, and what he could gain through honing his skills. Previously, he had been too busy absorbing and processing what was around him, but now things were different. Over those 2 months, Enkrid had refined his training methods during his journey. It was time to put them into practice.
I think I'll need some help.
And the first person to start with was that stray cat, Jackson.
Throw it.
As soon as Enkrid's words fell, Jackson's hand moved. There was no time to care about the sound of the air being sliced. The sly feral cat with reddish-brown hair, standing 7 steps ahead, hurled a stone, and what appeared as a dot expanded right in front of his eyes. As his concentration heightened, he perceived the trajectory of the flying stone. It was the moment he turned his body to avoid it. Another stone appeared in the spot where he was dodging. It was a throwing technique that occupied space with a time difference. Enkrid's body twisted in the realm of the unconscious. Pivoting on his left foot, he pulled his body back to the right and twisted his waist in the opposite direction. It was a movement that truly contorted his body into a bizarre shape. Using the force from his waist, he gained momentum and, by ducking his head and rolling forward, avoided all the stones.
Weren't you supposed to dodge in place?
A nonchalant tone reached his ears.
I will eventually.
It wasn't something that needed to be done right now, but after repeating it enough, it would come naturally. Something that could be known without peering into the future. If you keep walking steadily, you'll pass the milestones and reach your destination. He had proven this with his body and learned it with his life. Enkrid answered indifferently. He stood up and brushed off the dust from his body. It was the moment when the blue light signaling dawn was crushed by the rising sun, turning into orange and yellow hues. Early in the morning, the time when everyone awakens. As if on cue, the entire company was outside, watching Enkrid and Jackson. Each one had a different look in their eyes. Rem was bundled up in warm fur, with eyes that seemed to ask why they were doing this nonsense in the cold early morning. Auden had a pleased smile on his face. Ragna looked on indifferently, twirling his wrist. Teresa wasn't present due to her duties, and Dunbachel glanced at Rem and then at Enkrid before shaking her head alone. She wanted to imitate Enkrid, but she figured that if she made Rem do it, he'd end up smashing his own head with a rock. Enkrid didn't pay attention to the gazes, and instead immersed himself in his thoughts. It was a thought that had occupied him throughout 2 months of constant walking, running, and fighting.
The sense of evasion is a reflex that occurs in the realm of the unconscious.
Seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, and smelling are called the 5 senses. The 6th sense is what condenses these senses into one and reaches a conclusion before the process is understood. Intuition is the ability to perceive without going through the processes of sensation, experience, association, judgment, or reasoning. The sense of evasion is a technique created from intuition in the realm of the 6th sense. Until now, he thought that was enough.
No, it's not.
Pondering was both Enkrid's habit and everything to him. He pondered and saw the path he had to take. It was, as always, a thorny path, a rough and rugged road, a path that climbs cliffs, but he would enjoy the journey nonetheless.
In the realm of consciousness.
Read all the trajectories of the incoming stones, dodge them, and incorporate deliberate movements. That would serve as preparation for the next move. It was the conclusion he had reached by combining what he had learned from the unnamed correct sword technique, what he had gained through experience, and what he had realized by observing Jackson's preparation.
Again.
The goal was to dodge all the stones flying at close range while in place and to elicit the intended reaction speed. Of course, that wasn't the only thing he was doing. After this, it was Auden's turn.
Brother, you seem to enjoy hardship.
Why are you saying that with such a wide grin?
Well, of course, because the Lord said, one cannot speak of hardship without walking the path of hardship.
Enkrid interpreted the words of the ignorant religious brute in his own way. In other words, it sounded to him like Auden was saying he was delighted at the prospect of half-killing him through training. Enkrid smiled back. Walking the path of hardship, if there's fruit at the end, he'll be satisfied whether it's sweet or bitter. For a man who never stopped walking in place, even a small reward would be precious. Whether it's a sweet fruit or a bitter one, a fruit is still a fruit. And that made Auden quite happy. Even though he was hinting that he might half-kill him, wasn't he smiling like this?
Let's do it.
Auden taught Enkrid partial strengthening training. It was an advanced technique even among the isolation techniques, truly a path of hardship. Previously, to improve flexibility, he had broken down and stretched his body joint by joint. This time, it was about training different parts of the body separately. He divided the day into 3, the upper body in the morning, the lower body at noon, and the hidden muscles in the evening.
There are muscles that are easy to feel and see, but there are also those that are not visible. In the isolation techniques, we refer to these as inner muscles. For example, here.
As he spoke, Auden jabbed a finger around Enkrid's waist. A terrible pain, like being stabbed all over with knives, started from his waist and spread throughout his body. The pain was so intense that he let out a groan without realizing it.
Exactly, we'll be training those muscles.
Next was the regeneration body.
Then comes the strong body.
He trained his inner and outer muscles to the point of near torture, rolling and rolling again.
Normally, this would take years of pouring effort into it, but Brother Commander, you might be a genius when it comes to building your body. Body training is also a matter of talent. Not many people realize that. Additionally, it's curious. You seem to have little talent in the physical realm, yet here you are. I suppose it's a talent that's invisible to my eyes.
As he continued to speak at length, only half of it registered in Enkrid's mind. When you're repeatedly sitting and standing on one leg with 3 stones tied to your back, you tend not to hear the sounds around you. Sweat poured down his face. Winter weather couldn't compete with the heat of training.
Good.
Auden smiled broadly. Enkrid smiled back. Just because something was harsh didn't mean it was bad. This was its own kind of enjoyment. Every training session was equally intense. For example, carrying a stone or even Auden on his back while walking like a beast. To develop ankle flexibility, he stood on one foot with a stone on his back and picked up coins from the ground. He repeated all of this dozens, even hundreds of times. It was grueling, exhausting, and difficult. He couldn't afford to lose focus. Since it wasn't something that yielded results overnight, it could have easily become boring, but he did it. Without persistence, what would be left of Enkrid? Besides, for him this wasn't boring at all.
I'll do it too.
Dunbachel, who was next to him, insisted on joining in, but after 50 laps of beast walking. A technique where you use your hands like feet to train your muscles in isolation, her face turned pale. Still, even as she dripped sweat onto the ground, Dunbachel persisted, though her gaze, cast repeatedly at Enkrid whenever he was struggling, seemed rather strange. It wasn't something to dwell on. Enkrid was too busy reviewing and refining his own training. Rolling his body was a daily routine, and in all that rolling, he couldn't neglect his sword training. The first lesson of the fluid sword technique: just because you strike softly doesn't mean it's not a blade. In the end, he honed a swordsmanship style he roughly named the snake sword. After that came the unnamed correct sword technique. Then he returned to the middle sword technique, and finally he pondered speed and technical swordsmanship. He polished, searched, and pursued this over and over again.
Rem.
He didn't forget to apply what he had learned and realized through Rem.
Damn it, do you think I'm some kind of combat puppet who fights whenever you call? It feels like you're treating me like a human golem.
Enkrid was taken aback. He had secretly been thinking of Rem as something like that. Does he have mind-reading powers?
If you don't want to, just leave.
Ragnar, who had been quietly watching from the side, spoke as he sharpened his sword on a whetstone. Scrape ting! Seeing him take care of his sword like that, it felt like watching a child finally come of age.
Get lost, you lazy weasel, before I split your skull with an axe.
Rem immediately turned his head and glared at him. It was just part of the routine.
Yeah, the blade's well sharpened now, so it'll be good to stain it with some barbarian blood.
Ragnar tried to rise with his sword in hand. It looked like a fight was about to break out.
Both of you can come at me if you want.
Enkrid provoked them both. At those words, Rem and Ragnar's gazes shifted back to Enkrid. Rem blinked, and Ragnar sat back down. Scrape, he resumed sharpening his sword. It was just one sentence, but it was a very effective way to diffuse the fight.
You're gonna lose,
Ragnar said, still seated.
All right.
Rem approached, smacking the back of his hand with the flat of his axe. Ragnar stood up with his sword and began practicing his swings on the other side of the training ground. Sometimes slow, sometimes fast. Enkrid observed for a moment, then silently picked up his sword. Gripping it with both hands, he focused, trying to read Rem's intentions. Sword against sword, blade against blade. The cold air cut between them. In the past, their first sparring match had been nothing more than a whimsical pastime for Rem. Afterward, the axe carried a playful edge to it. But now, even Rem couldn't take Enkrid lightly.
He's a monster, a real...
Rem thought to himself. If talent could be overcome with effort, then the term monster was more fitting than anything else. That made it all the more interesting. At first, he was just curious to see when Enkrid would break, thinking he'd just sit back and watch. But before he knew it, he had become part of Enkrid's company, and it felt like he had become a true subordinate to him.
If the people back home saw this, they'd freak out.
Rem briefly thought about the past, about what he had left behind in his hometown, but then he quickly let it go, letting those thoughts fly away from his mind. What did it matter now? He soon crossed his hands, holding the axes. The blades met each other lightly, like a greeting. At the sound of the crossed axes, Enkrid moved. He lowered his upper body and kicked off the ground, rushing forward in an instant. Rem saw everything. A boldness surged from around his heart, compelling him to face an opponent directly. His dynamic vision was on a completely different level from an ordinary person. Rem twisted his left foot and swung his axe. Normally, even if blocked, this would have been a slash as fast and bright as a ray of light, cutting through the sword, forearm, and torso. It was a heavy ray of light, augmented by weight, but Enkrid deflected it with his sword. However, because he didn't advance even half a step further, despite deflecting the axe, he couldn't drive his sword forward. The snake sword was blocked. Rem swung his second axe, a double slash. It was a technique Rem was confident in, and Enkrid blocked the second axe as well. The moment Rem realized this, he couldn't help but feel a surge of joy.
Good.
At that moment, the heated fur that Rem had draped over his back went flying off with a whoosh. Revealing his bare arms, Rem bared his fangs in a wide grin. It was a full-faced smile. After deflecting the two slashes, Enkrid stood facing him, sword in hand naturally. He smiled too. From the side, they looked like madmen. Why would they be smiling while fighting as if trying to kill each other? Anyway, this was Enkrid's daily routine as of late. Ever since he returned, he focused solely on training, sparring, and conditioning. He didn't even fulfill his duties as the training company commander. Before he could use being busy as an excuse, a new scouting unit had to be assembled, and the number of troops on duty doubled. The situation around them was so tense. He couldn't afford to run outside for training or to go hunting beasts or monsters. Naturally, the commissions also halted. However, they couldn't stop the movement of merchants or large trading companies. Their territory was still becoming a central hub for trade. All of this could be wiped out by a single blaze, but for now, it was the best they could do. It was around this time that Marcus was busy trying to handle the situation that had just exploded. Enkrid didn't concern himself with either Viscount Tarnin or the Black Blade bandits. He had decided what he needed to do, and he did just that. He moved and acted. When it was time to step in, he would. But he felt that time hadn't come yet. If Marcus knew, he might be stunned. But the truth was, Enkrid's involvement wouldn't have changed anything, so this was indeed the right approach. And so about 2 weeks passed.
You're still the same.
Marcus came to find Enkrid. It was in the private training ground in front of the independent company's barracks. Snow was pouring down heavily from above, making the soldiers curse under their breath. If left alone, the snow would turn the ground into an icy mess and make it even harder to clear, so they were probably sighing deeply as they watched it fall. A makeshift roof had been set up in one corner of the training ground, with pillars holding it up. Leaning halfway against one of those pillars, Marcus spoke with a bitter smile.
I've been completely outplayed.
What do you mean?
I'm leaving.
Puzzled, Enkrid looked at him intently, and Marcus sighed heavily before continuing.
To the capital, the central city.
Suddenly, Enkrid had ears too. He knew that the situation around them had become a complete mess. Without reinforcements, they were like a thin candle in the wind. Of course, that thin candle wouldn't go out easily. But now Marcus was pulling out? No, he said he had been outplayed, so that wasn't it. It wasn't that he was pulling out, but that someone had applied pressure.
The next lordship will be handed over to the first company commander.
Enkrid exhaled a deep breath and set down the iron club, which weighed as much as 10 swords, that he had coaxed and persuaded the blacksmith to make. It was a good training tool that naturally strengthened the forearms, wrists, and even the core when swung. Of course, it was also helpful for refining swordsmanship, a method of training to instill more precise sword techniques into the body. As a thud echoed, Marcus briefly glanced down. He saw the blunt end of the sword firmly lodged at an angle into the frozen ground. What is that? Marcus once again reminded himself of how much of a monster Enkrid was. As he stood there, Kreis poked his head out of the barracks.
Oh, Battalion Commander, you're here?
Kreis opened the door and gave a gesture that somewhat resembled a salute. It didn't look sharp by any means, more like a half-hearted attempt at a military salute.
At ease.
Marcus waved his hand dismissively. Enkrid clasped his hands together, resting them on top of the grip.
Tobacco?
Marcus asked.
I don't smoke.
Marcus put a cigarette in his mouth. Just as he was about to strike the flint, Kreis hurried over and handed him a small ember. Marcus lit the cigarette, taking a deep drag before exhaling. The white smoke mixed with his breath and spread into the air, its acrid scent stinging his nostrils. The cigarette was made from rolled leaves, and it didn't exactly smell pleasant. What followed was a conversation that was simple and straightforward. Why must Marcus follow the call of the capital?
Those damn noble families should be protecting me and shielding me at times like this, but instead they threw me out to take all the blame. Those political bastards.
These were Marcus's words. For a brief moment he wondered if he was cursing himself, but now was not the time to bring it up.
The central government might see the fact that some of the border guard are raising war horses and training archers over here as a sign of rebellion. Why concentrate power in the north, especially when you're a noble of one of the prominent families? A prominent family? My family, of course.
There was no need to ask which family. The point was this: Marcus intended to reorganize the north, focusing on the border guard. But to the central government, it seemed like, what are you trying to do by gathering power over there?
To take good care of the north.
So, he answered.
It doesn't look like it. Just come up and talk about it. And aren't you originally from a family that guards the capital? Come up. We'll make you a central official. What if I refuse? Huh? So you really are planning a rebellion, aren't you? Are you going to refuse this? I'm not rebelling. Then come to the capital. Let's talk about it. Stop bothering the neighboring territories. You said you're just defending, right? Then they won't mess with you either. If I withdraw, they'll attack, knowing I'm gone. So I'll finish this task first and then come. You're definitely a rebel, this guy. You're a traitor. No, I'm not. Then come.
Stripped of flowery language, titles, and trivial details, the conversation went something like this. Marcus resisted, but it was in vain. He was ordered to return to the capital.
This won't be the end. There must be some rogue elements behind this.
These were the words of Marcus, a born politician, but why did he go out of his way to say this? Before Enkrid could voice his doubts, Marcus spoke first. He straightened up from the pillar he had been leaning on and stood tall. He stood straight, like a soldier at attention, and squared his shoulders. For a moment, it seemed like Marcus was sucking in all the air around him. He composed himself in this way.
Help Graham protect the territory.
It wasn't an order, it was a request. That's how it sounded to Enkrid's ears.
Yes.
So he answered, And Marcus, with a somewhat drained expression, spoke again.
All this worry was pointless.
Pardon?
Never mind.
Marcus turned away. Battalion Commander Marcus had a few concerns as he made his way here. Would his friend Enkrid stay in the territory until the end? Would it be better to abandon this place and call him to the capital, or would he just go his own way?
Damn those capital bureaucrats.
Marcus suddenly felt like cursing the rotten nobles and officials. He cursed them countless times in the past, but now he wanted to put a hole in each of their foreheads. He even considered hiring an assassin so famous they'd be mentioned in history books. Maybe the one nicknamed Red Dot for leaving a red mark on the forehead of those he killed. Or was he called Red Spot? Whatever. Anyway, he wanted to cut off and eliminate the rotten parts.
Fine, I'm going.
He had no intention of running to the capital just because they called for him. He was going to hunt down each of the ones who played with the Black Blade bandits, but to wield that kind of power, this place had to remain intact. The enemy was targeting the border guard. So what could Marcus do?
What else is there to do?
Just as usual, leave the fighting to those who excel at it. Marcus himself should go and do what he does best. Before departing, Marcus decided that he needed to write a few more letters. After all, he needed to prepare for everything he could before leaving. Among all the preparations, his thoughts even reached Enkrid, who would be the biggest variable.
Will he stay?
True to his nature as a politician, he came half out of doubt, half to persuade. But the answer came too easily. He answered willingly. There was no falsehood, and while there wasn't a strong sense of duty, Enkrid would protect this place. This is the kind of man he is. Whatever the fire burning within his chest is, it burns steadily and doesn't easily reveal itself. If he truly wanted to be a knight, he should have already gone to the capital and fought his way into the knightly order. Despite having the will, why does he remain here? A sudden curiosity arose.
What kind of knight do you wish to become?
Next time they meet, he wanted to ask. Somehow his heart felt more at ease. The frustration eased a bit, like unraveling a tangled thread. Though he didn't know the reason, nor could he foresee everything that would happen.
I won't be caught off guard so easily.
It was strange. No matter how hard Graham, the company commander of the first company, tried, his efforts didn't feel as reassuring as a single word from Enkrid.
Is it because of the difference in skill?
Now he knew. Enkrid had become a fearsome swordsman. He was on the path to knighthood, having realized the will. But was it because of that? No, that wasn't it. Marcus instinctively knew. When he returned to his office, he saw that Graham, the first company commander, had been waiting for him.
I'm sorry. A proper appointment ceremony won't be possible, and more importantly, I don't know what the battalion commander of the Green Pearl Garrison is thinking. If that guy is turned too, things might get difficult. Don't worry, sir. I won't lose to the likes of the Black Blade.
Graham was also a remarkable soldier and man.
So why doesn't it feel as reassuring as a simple yes?
Marcus shook his head inwardly and patted Graham on the shoulder. The situation was getting dire, and yet he had to leave. It was a truly different feeling. He resolved once more. He would behead anyone involved in this matter.
A heretic cultist has risen in the south of Martai.
This was the word spreading among the merchants and travelers passing through the territory. They said a bishop of the heretic cult had appeared in the south, leading a horde of monsters. There were widespread rumors that a wolf bishop, a fairly well-known figure among the heretics, had led an army out. Of course, it wasn't just rumors. As winter approaches, I hereby proclaim this place a sanctuary for those who starve and shiver in the cold. These words, spoken by the bishop, were written on papers that were spread everywhere. It even reached the border guard.
Oh, damn it, this is...
Some of the soldiers clicked their tongues when they saw it. The bishop had declared Martai and the surrounding border guard area as a sanctuary of the heretic cult. It was essentially a warning. If you resist, you'll all be killed, so you'd better pack up and leave. This was a significant problem. After Marcus left, the first company commander, who became the lord and battalion commander, broke into a cold sweat in the face of the approaching tide of problems. Why have the heretics suddenly appeared? The situation was dire. The limitations of their forces were clear, and the Black Blade bandits and the heretic cult were attacking from different directions.
Has Marcus fled in fear?
Viscount Tarnin escalated the situation with his wild outburst. He subtly advanced his troops as well. The scent of battle was gradually spreading.
I'll have to send someone to Count Molson to request reinforcements.
Graham immediately began to take action. A member of a powerful noble family with significant influence in the region happened to be in the territory, wouldn't they help? He subtly mentioned that the noble had 2 sons in the area as well. A response came.
The road ahead ought see difficult. Keep moving forward. The cultists are also rising in the Count's territory, and it's winter, so too many monsters are appearing. Handle it yourself.
The first company commander slammed his fist against the wall. The wall, made of solid bricks, didn't break. A heavy pain spread from his fingertips to his nerves. But did that matter right now?
Damn it. Your territory is next in line after ours.
The Count Molson's land couldn't be indifferent to such matters. The pig Tarnin was leading the way, but the ones hiding behind him were the Black Blade bandits. No, at this point, they weren't even hiding. Several swordsmen, clearly known to be part of the bandits, had revealed themselves. It was a declaration of intent. While the cultists were advancing from below, keeping Martai in check, the 2 groups seemed to have made a non-aggression pact, not infringing on each other's territory. It looked like they were playing a rigged game. If it looked that way, it probably was. So, would these 2 groups simply conquer the border guard and be done with it? Would they just clap their hands, say, "We're done here," and disband? No chance. If that happened, they would only become more rampant. Graham sent out ravens and pigeons to the capital. No answer came back. Instead, other news reached him.
Battalion commander.
He had apologized for having to pass on his position during such a moment. There was no formal appointment ceremony, but Graham had intended to solidify his position as battalion commander with this incident. However, he recalled Marcus's parting words.
If it gets too bad, do what you can and get out of there.
He wondered if now was that time. The news he received pushed the new battalion commander into despair. It was something that darkened Graham's eyes with even more gloom.
Aspen has made a move.
There was a man who had originally been the commander of the reserve forces. He had stationed his army on the Green Pearl Plain, training war horses, opening new farmlands and establishing villages. Fortification was a priority, so he began by building barracks and wooden fortifications. From the village to the estate beyond the garrison, he was fully integrating the land into Norilia's territory. And now, a messenger from the Green Pearl had arrived. The news was that Aspen had mobilized his forces, breaking their agreement and crossing the border. It was an invasion. Aspen was not the type to sit quietly, sucking his thumb and watching after losing once. But why now, of all times? This was a problem that required support from the central government. The border guard alone could never handle it. Support would surely come. Aspen had made a move, after all. But
of course, we have to survive until then for it to mean anything.
As soon as he was newly appointed as battalion commander, he wanted to run away. The schemes of the Black Blade bandits had become a sharp blade, tearing into the border guard. They had driven out Marcus, summoned the cultists, and even spurred Aspen into action. The sky was dark. Thick clouds covered it, blocking the sunlight even during the day. Dark clouds hung over the territory as well.
So what are you going to do about it?
The Black Blade officer chuckled to himself, savoring the satisfaction as he downed a gulp of strong liquor. Dare to mess with us? They had utilized their connections and poured gold into this effort, and this was the result. Viscount Tarnin and the Black Blade army. To the south of Martai, the cultist army. And to the east, beyond the Green Pearl Plains where the border guard was stationed, Aspen's uprising. So, what are you going to do now? With news of trouble brewing from all directions, the merchants gradually stopped coming to the territory.
They say war is coming. I heard the cultists are planning an invasion. No, that's not it. They say the army stationed at Green Pearl has turned on them. They're upset about not being appointed as the leader of the border guard. They say the central government has given up on this place because it's too much of a headache. And that's not all. I heard even Count Molson has turned his back on them.
When will the border guard fall? Enkrid dismissed the rumors without much concern, but not everyone could be so indifferent. Graham, the newly appointed battalion commander and leader of the territory, felt like he was suffocating. It felt as if someone had pressed a blade to his throat. Calling a military meeting to stop Viscount Tarnan left him uneasy about their rear. He sent a messenger to the Green Pearl Battalion, but the reply only made things worse.
The enemy has many troops. If you don't want to see your soldiers slaughtered, you need to send reinforcements.
Reinforcements, they say. Here we're so short-handed that I'm tempted to start drafting a ghoul army. His scraggly beard and bloodshot eyes reflected his inner turmoil.
Damn it, Marcus.
In the end, Graham cursed Marcus. What's there to be happy about in becoming the battalion commander and lord when things are like this? While the leader of the territory was teetering on the edge of panic, someone in Enkrid's company was reaching a similar state.
Commander, isn't it time to run away?
What was he talking about?
Did you swear an oath of loyalty to the Queen? No, right? I don't think we can fend off the cultists, the Blackblade, and Aspen all at once.
This was out of character. Enkrid took a moment to observe Big Eyes. He was shaking his leg, trying to bite his nails, but then spat out instead, blinking constantly. Even now, he blinked several times while looking at Enkrid, and the tremor in his pupils was evident. This isn't normal. Enkrid didn't think he knew the full past of every soldier or fully understood their personalities. But he did know a few things. He naturally came to know that Rem hates the cold, and Ragna is a lazy person with a poor sense of direction. He also noticed that Jackson, who has many secrets, sometimes shows a chilling side, though it's unclear who it's directed at, and he knew about Kreis's habits as well. This wide-eyed friend didn't have an easy life in the past. Indeed, who among those present here has led a peaceful life? Someone like that wouldn't have ended up here in the first place. This unit wasn't called a bunch of troublemakers for nothing. Kreis was one of those troublemakers.
This is the worst.
Kreis muttered, listing off the grim scenarios that were about to unfold.
Even if we manage to hold off the Blackblade's forces by relying on the walls, what about the cultists coming up from below? That soap called Wolf Bishop is quite notorious. I've been gathering some information.
He spoke with a pale face, devoid of even a bitter smile.
He's the kind of guy who drives around hundreds of wolf beasts. The fact that a wanted man like him has come out means something. Whether it's Molson or whoever, it means the kingdom has abandoned this place. I don't know what they've gained in exchange for abandoning us, but they've probably gotten everything they wanted. So, this land has been forsaken by the Queen. Look at this. Aspen has openly lined up his troops, and yet not a single reinforcement is coming. Even a part of the Knight Order should have been sent here, but they haven't come. What does that tell you? It's all politics. Maybe they've made a deal to give up Green Pearl in exchange for something, or perhaps they've struck some kind of agreement with the cultists. At the very least, the Blackblade is.
Kreis's words dragged on. Enkrid understood some of it, and let the rest go unheard. He looked around. He could see the eyes watching him. There was something he realized from this. They would do whatever he decided. If he suggested they abandon the territory and leave, they would all follow. Rem, Ragna, Auden Jackson, Dunbachel, Teresa, and finally Kreis, who was consumed with anxiety. The panther that had quietly slipped in would be the same. 8 of them and himself. 9 in total, a force that would normally be considered negligible. But now, the last battle was an easy victory because Marcus had kept this company's strength hidden. That was Kreis's analysis. Enkrid's judgment was the same. So, what would happen if they withdrew now? What do you think would happen? It would be a complete disaster.